we are now recording. This is actually take two. So, welcome back, everyone, to our review of DS9. We are on episode 20, the final episode of season 1. Say hi to the audience, Pike. Don't tell them how much of an idiot I am for screwing up OBS.
uh, he just had a bored ape in Hong Kong convention moment. uh,
See,
anyways,
now I'm just gonna,
yeah,
now that you made fun of me for that, I'm just gonna tell them that you thought of that joke while I was fixing the OBS problem, and then I was like, "Hey, you should
yeah,
save that for the stream." And you're like, "Don't worry, I'll just retell it and make it seem natural." And you failed at doing that.
yeah. Well, you didn't help because at least some might believe that was natural, while others might not. But now you fully revealed the game, Hollux. Good job.
Well,
Anyways,
anyways, so we are back. This is a pretty good episode. We were talking about it before in the first take, and the only real complaints I have about this episode are I personally feel that it could have functioned maybe a little bit better earlier on in the season. I think it does a
yeah,
lot to it does a lot to contextualize Cisco's relationship to the Bajoran people because one of our I guess our biggest criticism of let's see, I want to remember the name of the episode, past prologue, is it is a Kira focused episode, and Kira is working fairly close with a person who's been named the emissary of the prophets. Kira's faith
yeah,
is very important to her. She's working with what is essentially their messiah, their Christ-like figure, their effective equivalent. And that doesn't
hmm
really come up in their relationship. They actually bicker and fight, and I'm like, would you be doing that with this person? Would you not be revering him, treating him with some level of reverence? And
hmm
this episode actually goes a little bit, it does a little bit of work showing that the Bajoran people don't have 100% faith in Cisco as their prophet right now.
Yeah, because there's always going to be these these conversations within religious societies, like what is the proper way to follow our faith.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll get
e-
to it when we get there, but there's there's malicious actors who are trying to undermine his position. There's general distrust of a shift in the status quo. There's Cisco's position in the Federation kind of being something that's already a red flag for them. All in all, it's like that does well enough for me to accept why the Bajoran people don't just blatantly listen to Cisco. It's like
yeah,
if someone came down and we definitively knew they were like Jesus Christ, and he made some sort of proclamation. Anyone who follows Christianity would probably listen to him no matter what, just because of the nature of how he's proven his position. So if you have Cisco, who
so
more or less,
it,
oh sorry,
it's
say everything.
it's slightly different from that because Cisco is no one else saw what Cisco did there, and while
No,
some
hundred
are
percent,
willing.
100%.
So it's the same thing with Christ himself during his first time here. It's like, many of the Jews didn't believe he was the Messiah for various reasons, which fair. If
No, hundred
like
percent.
there's always debates in Judaism about like, okay, is this person we're calling a Messiah like actually a Messiah? Because there's like multiple Messiahs like
Mm-hmm.
who lead revolts and such, and it's like yeah, yeah. So if it would be different if like literally a prophet showed up and just like said he's our emissary. Like it
Well,
then it'd be like,
so the counter I would want to have to that is Kaiopaka seemed adamant that he was the emissary, and she's the leader of their
um
faith. I mean, like all I'm trying to say, right, is there is probably a good contingent of the Bajoran people who would listen to Cisco if he was leaning into the role, but there is a
oh yeah,
sizable amount who won't, to the point where it's not a useful thing. And also, there's a million moral implications because Cisco doesn't necessarily believe he's the emissary of the prophets. So if he was using that position he has to influence the
it
Bajoran
would be
people, that would that's I believe
ah,
that is against the Federation's ethics. They do talk about that from time to time,
yeah.
but that's also mostly against Cisco's ethics. But one of the things, and I want to kind of get back on point about this episode, I think this episode does a lot to contextualize Cisco's role in it. This is also very much a Cisco focused episode. He gets a few good
Oh
speeches
yeah.
in here. And again, that's something I kind of want more of. We got like 4 Kira episodes, and that's great, but I think we need more. We
But
needed
we
more
want
for
Cisco.
Cisco. Yeah, I mean, like we get a lot of good Cisco like throughout the series, but I mean, if I had to guess, let's see, what would be the other best Cisco episode that we kind of have? Like, I mean,
Uh,
it's not a good episode, but Cisco does have a lot to do in Dax.
we don't talk about Dax. We don't do that.
Um,
Oh,
yeah, we don't talk about Move Along Home either. The Nagus isn't really about him. The Vortex is about Odo. Battle Lines is mostly Kira. The Storyteller is O'Brien mostly. Progress? What was Progress again?
mm.
I'm briefly
Progress was
forgetting.
the one where Kira has to burn down the old man's house.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
That's right. I always forget that one. Yeah, so I mean, we have not really had a super heavy episode that focuses on Cisco. And this one doesn't super focus on Cisco, right? Like there's a lot of plot lines going on, a lot of characters get involved. But Cisco does
Yeah.
have sort of the big emotional moments, the sort of big tie-in moments that sort of tie in the theme to the
Yeah.
episode. And
Yeah. The main two characters here are, well, I would say three. They're O'Brien, Keiko, and Cisco. And uh Keiko and Brian go together
well,
because
and
it's
the
like, oh, husband,
antagonist.
wife. Well, yeah, but I meant like of our regular like cast that we'll
Hmm.
see. This is so like okay, Keiko's like a part of the initializing incident with the antagonist, right? And then from there, the conflict is basically her belief that she needs to teach this and do what she does. O'Brien, as her husband, wants to support her, but he's having to deal with a mystery that's going on in the background that eventually converges with it. And then Cisco's trying to deal with both those situations as both the commander of the station and as, the often dubious, not dubious, what's the word? Reluctant emissary. That's the word I was looking for. Reluctant. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like I
Uh,
said, I just think it's like this episode's really good at giving Cisco a lot to do, and why I would want something a little bit sooner. Why I'd want something like this a little bit sooner in the season is I think we needed more Cisco. We needed more Cisco. We needed more of understanding the faith as it sort of ties in because the wormhole is such an important thing. It's tied to the wormhole aliens slash prophets. I think we just needed more of this early on in the season. We kind of got, and part of the thing is the first season of any show is always going to be a little rough. They don't always know what they're
mhm.
doing. They don't always know the direction they're going to go. For all they knew, like I remember you were reading the thing, they weren't 100% sure they were going to get a second season.
Yeah, well, it's one of the, it wasn't like, oh, you've been told, like, don't expect it, but it's very much a case like, listen, we don't have a big budget, and this is secondary to
Well,
TNG, and
yeah,
you never
because
know with
yeah,
executives.
at
Yeah.
that point, TNG was 6 seasons in, so they're not just or 5 seasons in, 5 seasons in, so they're not just going to cancel that outright. And if anything was going to be canceled because of budget issues, it would have been DS9. So,
Hmm.
it's one of those things where we had a lot of individual episodes that don't really tie into bigger plots. All of them really were mostly character focused. But so this episode does tie into a larger plot line. And you want to read off some of the stuff you figured out about the episode, looking up its facts, particularly about the ones about cliffhangers?
Yeah, let me get back to it. So, if everyone in the audience, if you know, you know, TNG pretty much, I think every season ended on a cliffhanger, except for, the final season where that's like, oh, that's the wrap up and it ties back to the very beginning, right? But it was kind of like established of like, oh, in the new like form of Star Trek, you have cliffhangers, right? But um there's like two things to go into this. One, this is the first episode to depart from the tradition, like the then modern tradition of season finales starting as cliffhangers. And Bear, pretty much. So Bear says, "Oh, I know people wanted a big cliffhanger, and I love cliffhangers, but they're kind of gimmicky. And unless you can find a way to make it work for you, why do the gimmick?" And he mentions, we just could not do successfully because of budget restraints. And Michael Piller himself said, uh, uh, basically like his perspective was with the newness and the newness of the series and the excitement of it. He felt they didn't need to do a cliffhanger. If they had something they could do, they would do it. But he was worried, like it could cost it. It would cost more to do a cliffhanger, due to like the trends and such, and it would add to like the budget they've already blown, and they were just like, we already have an episode we can do, that gives a completeness for the season, which is a good thing. Like ending a season off and then being able to pick it up later, but not needing to is good. And I mean, they do pick up like these threads here. Like this is basically like you can argue like a prologue to the three-parter in season two that starts off, but you don't need the three-parter to have. You don't have to call this a four-parter. This is just an episode that sets the foundation that can then be built upon. But one idea they did have for a season finale was actually a crossover with the Next Generation, where they were going to have the two crews fight together to fight against a Cardassian invasion that would have happened. Now, that probably would have been awesome, but again, uh, budget.
I
And it wouldn't
yeah
necessarily connect to like the first episode as they wanted to. So it's just like, yeah, that wouldn't have been a good alternative either.
yeah
So
because
yeah,
you mentioned that they wanted to bookend the first season, which is always good. I mean, it's a storytelling classic, is to bookend your story in a way that sort of signifies a cohesive story has been told from beginning to end, or at least in this case from beginning to next major change in the status quo. But
hmm.
again, I would have rather something like this episode be a little bit earlier on in the season. And
Yeah, well, they need to get this one way or another,
yeah,
and so if it's either this or that other idea, it's like we need this, because
yeah.
we know for like like a Cardassian invasion would be such an escalation suddenly of just like that hadn't been set up
Well,
throughout.
there was kind
Like
of
I
a minor invasion within Emissary.
well, yeah, but that so that's a complicated issue of real world politics. Of like, what is unclaimed space, and if two powers come to claim it, does aggressive act like is that technically an invasion, or is that just border skirmishes and third
Uh,
party like undenoted third party land? I don't
I mean,
know.
I don't know. I don't know what the boundaries of the Bajoran system necessarily are determined at, but I think. I mean, I do kind of wish we had a crossover between DS9 and TNG in that sense. One thing I
Yeah.
do, because we did get there was a minor crossover with TNG and DS9. There's a TNG episode where we get Bashir and Quark, and I think Odo. No, not Odo. Who else is mentioned in that episode? I think Kira makes an appearance in that
Uh,
episode.
I mostly remember Bashir and Quark because Quark has the connection to Riker. Well,
And
actually,
Bashir.
we also get a. So we have that episode where in TNG where Quark we have the establishment of like, oh, Quark and Riker are connected because Riker wants to clean them out. And there's like Bashir working with Data to examine something. I cannot remember the. Was it like his past self they found? I think that was the Mark Twain like storyline, wasn't it?
No, 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 no. The
What? What?
the thing that Bashir was looking at was very much like different. I can't remember what it was, but
Oh,
all,
okay.
all I distinctly remember is like when I first watched that episode, I was like, I don't care about these other guys because I hadn't watched DS9 yet. And
Yeah.
whenever I watch that episode now, I'm like, oh my god, look, it's Quark and Bashir. Like I
Yeah.
care about them more than I care about the TNG crew.
Yeah. But we
So
do get an episode later in this series where we do have well, we had a Prius TNG crossover, but that was just Vash and Q, and then we kind of just agreed like, yeah, this was just bolted onto TNG and felt like a backdoor pilot to something else. But there is a later episode that will include somebody from TNG as like the central point, and they do interact heavily with another like
oh, I
a
mean, yeah,
DS9
they did that
character.
they did that plenty of times. There's a lot of TNG characters, but
Well, yeah, but I mean like it's not a case of like, oh, someone joining the cast permanently from the other side. I mean like, hey, we're going to have this, and
no, I
it's
know, yeah,
like
I know what you
a
mean.
Yeah.
Also,
Anyways,
I just noticed the website I use to pull up, I think we both use, to pull up the scripts for DS9 episodes, it's called
Paul Chakotay.
Chakotay.net. Yeah.
Yeah,
Why?
Chakotay. Ch-
Why? Like,
I,
for anyone who doesn't know, that's the vice captain in Star Trek Voyager. Uh,
um, maybe they just like Chakotay. That's fine by me. Like
I'm wondering
Chakotay's
why.
fine.
I don't know why you call it Chakotay.net. I guess maybe you're right. Maybe they just really like Chakotay, or they think it's some sort of
Yeah.
like translation thing ties with his. I have no idea.
I
But
think he does like do some stuff with his like well, I say with his Native American heritage. We're advice everyone. The Voyager stuff with Native American stuff. Yeah, the supposed expert they got for that was not an expert. Literally a fraud. It was
well, I mean,
not
like we know
good.
nothing about it, but apparently the actor who played Chakotay was very unhappy with it. So
Oh yeah, he he
I'm
was
gonna
not
at
pleased.
least go with his word of like apparently it wasn't done super well, and let's not talk about Voyager
Yeah,
because that's gonna get us into a pretty deep rabbit hole about talking about
yeah.
Voyager, which
But yeah, anyway, we should get to this episode fully.
I mean
So
we could. I mean, remember this is the last episode we're doing for this season, except for maybe a tier list episode that I have planned. So we should really savor this.
I love how he says that I have plan, and I'm just saying like I have not heard this plan before. What the fuck are you
I
talking
have
about,
told
Magic
you
Man?
about doing this tier list.
No, you have not. Unless it was like way at the beginning, and then we
No,
never
no, no.
discussed it
I
again.
literally mentioned this after duet.
I don't. Was it in the video?
I don't
If
know.
it's not in the video, it doesn't exist. Fans, go check the video and see if he's lying. I bet you
Joke's
he's trying
on
to
you.
gaslight me.
We don't have fans.
Oh shit!
Unless you're
Holy
watching
shit!
this in the
True
future,
though.
in which case we love you. But as of now, we
Um.
don't. So we really should probably get to the episode. In the hands of the
Yeah.
prophets. So I mean, I'm not gonna lie. This episode does deal with like a not irrelevant political issue. So
Alright.
let's hope it's not our most controversial episode right here. Because I think the episode actually handles this political issue fairly well. But we'll get to that. Um, so I think we finally get the name. Is this the first time we get the name of the Jumjustics?
The what?
The Jumjust, the
Uh.
Jumjust, the
Oh yeah,
Jumjustics.
the jump justice.
Yeah,
Sorry, the
like,
way you
again,
said it caught me off.
sorry,
Yeah,
these things that are that I always thought just looked like tongues, but
made for the sap of the jum tree.
But
Yeah.
in this really like in this scene, we kind of just get a line that O'Brien's been working with Neela, and they made a point that she's working out better than the last person he worked with, which I think that's a reference to the fact that the original extra they got to fill Neela's role was
Yeah, they had another character inside,
yeah,
but
they
she
had another
couldn't show up.
character. They had introduced, I believe it was her, in a prior
Yeah.
episode. Because again, one thing DS9 likes to do is it likes to introduce some of the extras or some of the people who they sort of just seem like background extras, but in reality, they do have this character intended to be in a larger plot line later on, and they kind of want to just keep them in the background as to make a sort of cohesive staff. But
Hmm.
they had one extra. Apparently, maybe things with the contract didn't work out, or they just couldn't get in contact. I don't know why they didn't use that second
Yeah, I
person.
think he was just not available, and it's just like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
just an extra that can, yeah.
Well, and so they got someone new, and we saw them last episode working with O'Brien. So they bring her up here, and I like the meta line where Keiko asks how his how he's working with that last person, and she's working out better than the last one. It's kind of I guess a reference to the point that there was a recent
Hmm.
change with that. So I do like that. And of
Yeah.
course, she's teasing him because she's making a point that, oh, you're working with this girl a lot. He's like, and O'Brien's like, wait a minute, are you jealous? And she's like, just keeping you on your toes. Like she's teasing him.
Yeah.
It's a nice little
Yeah.
line. A lot of people give Keiko like some crap for, she wasn't really given a lot in TNG to work with.
Hmm.
Uh, Apparently, Roddenberry didn't like the depictions of a lot of romantic relationships in Star Trek, which
Hmm.
obviously when he was alive, his point of view really carried. So they never really depicted that, and I guess it's maybe a little morbid, but as he died, they were able to sort of do that more freely. And I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah.
I do think the series benefits from it. I mean, I like Keiko because of her relationship with
It's good
O'Brien.
to
I don't
see
think
the
she's the
domestic.
yeah.
Oh,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
like
It's good to see
you have a married couple, so they should act like a married couple.
you have basically this gives you the domestic life. Cisco and Jake gives you the father son dynamic. O'Brien and Molly, the father daughter dynamic. All you need now is the. I mean, actually, no, we have the mother daughter dynamic because in the mother son dynamic because of the Crusher family and the Troy family. So yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, like, and we also
The,
you have Nog with Rom, Nog and Quark, and you also, I
oh
mean,
yeah.
obviously, O'Brien and Keiko's daughter is very young, so there's not really much to work off of that. But we do see them function as parents, which is nice. However, we then transition
Hmm.
into the schoolroom where Keiko is talking about, and this is kind of a nice little thing that happened. She mentions that, let's see, earlier this year, Commander Cisco and Lieutenant Dax went into discovered the wormhole and went into it and discovered the wormhole alien. So it has been
Hmm.
less than a year. I believe you brought up that it's been 7 months in the
7 months.
setting. Yeah,
Yeah, Cisco
most
mentions that it's. Mhm,
most Star Trek seasons, at least starting from TNG, encompass effectively a whole year, and that kind of just
mhm,
helps. I suppose that would help with aging up the character, making sure the characters age sort of appropriately with the seasons, things like that. And
mhm.
let's see, they do some questions, and then suddenly a religious woman enters, and this is Kai Wynn. She becomes quite the
Yep.
antagonist, not just in this episode, but throughout most of DS9. Uh, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
she comes in, and obviously you have this woman who's dressed in. She is a Kai, which would you say they're somewhat the equivalent of bishops
They are.
or
She
cardinals, I
is.
suppose?
I would say something somewhere in between bishops and cardinals because it tends to be. This will come up later, but it tends to be the next Kai is going to be someone um who is in her like position of
Yeah,
like
a Vedic.
uh yeah, a Vedic. It might just, but it might also just be like, oh, they only have like one word for priest and such, and it just happens to be like some are more influential than others.
I mean, yeah,
They might not have
there might be
thought.
something that denotes it, and they just don't want to complicate it for a TV show for us. So,
Yeah,
and
no,
I
wait, there are others. There are Renjins who are establishment. There are, yeah, so there's lower levels, and the main like body overseeing the faith is the Vedic Assembly. So yeah, basically there's 112 Vedics. They argue a lot, and yeah, Barial brings this up. Like I'm so tired of listening to them argue for hours.
yeah,
It's so annoying.
we'll get to
But yeah.
Baral, but one point I think they do mention is they mention at one point one of the meetings had like 60 Vedics, and we know Kai Wynn wasn't there, so that wasn't
Hmm.
necessarily all the Vedics. So there's a lot of Vedics. Like you said, they might just be
They
the
might have a core.
generalized terms for the priest.
N- No, 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 no. Like literally, I just looked up it up. It's like yeah, there's ranks below them, and the Vedic Assembly is these 112 Vedics, right? They
Okay.
are the ones generally giving uh like lower things. Like there's Vedics of specific orders, but they're probably like members of the faith who happen to be like who are of this rank, and they just happen to be from this order, and there's probably politicking of like who selected to be a Vedic based on. So a guy from our order just died. You need to select someone from our order, or there's going to be some controversies. So
Sure.
yeah.
But obviously, so you have this woman walk in, clearly dressed as some level of status, and she's telling Keiko to continue on with her lesson. So Keiko kind of quickly recovers, but she still seems a little uncomfortable, and she starts talking about the wormhole is
Yeah.
important for its use of travel, secure travel across the galaxy, and they're secure the
Hmm.
locations will not either they're sure the wormhole won't close, and they're sure the locations won't move.
Hmm.
So, uh, at one point, Keiko mentions that Cisco encountered the entities in the wormhole, and Wynn interrupts, saying, "By entities, do you not mean prophets?" And Keiko is
Hmm.
like, "Well, the Bejors worship the entities like prophets. Our studies of the wormhole have shown it was formed by unique particles we call veritrons, yada yada yada." And so, I mean, we can kind of just get to the point. There's a bit of an argument here, and This
Yeah.
really becomes analogous to the idea of teaching religion in schools.
Yep.
So,
Um.
I mean, I don't think we need to. I mean, should we sort of hint at what the sort of twist is at the end of this episode, because it kind of recontextualizes a lot of these arguments that are made.
Not yet.
Well,
Like,
I,
let's
I think
hold
we
off.
should, because like I think it really kind of, I think it helps when we kind of understand why characters are acting this way.
Hmm. So
So
basically, a certain someone here has plans,
yes, so
and
Kai,
yeah,
I mean, we'll leave some of it to chance, but Kai Wynn has an ulterior motive that has absolutely nothing to do with the teaching of the Bajoran faith inside these schools.
I
Absolutely
mean,
nothing.
it does, but it doesn't. It.
Well,
I mean,
the implication is
it's
that if she does care about this, it's not her primary motivation. This is just a means to an
yeah,
end right now. And
yeah.
um, so she basically starts saying, let's see, they basically start arguing what's the nature of teaching like about this wormhole if you're not going to acknowledge
Mhm,
these people as the prophets. And Keiko's like, well, they're not prophets, they're most likely just aliens. uh,
mhm.
and when asked, so do you believe the celestial temple of the prophets exists within the passage? And Keiko says, I respect the Bajoran people believe it does. Uh, and of course,
Yeah,
they're arguing all this in front of a bunch of children. And Keiko says, no, I
yeah,
don't teach Bajoran spiritual beliefs. That's your job. Mine's to open children's minds to history, to literature, to mathematics, to science. And Wynn says, you're opening the children's mind to blasphemy. I cannot permit it to continue. Um, I mean, I don't want to get us into talking about like our opinions on this matter or what we sort of think.
Well,
I mean, all I kind of want to say is I do understand where Win is coming from. So
I
there's a we
I
know there's a lot
love
of
how.
go on.
Actually, go ahead. I'll bring it up at the end once you're done.
So
Go
I mean,
ahead.
all
Sorry.
I'm saying is like I think again I think this episode does a very good job at justifying both points, but also showing how both sides can get basically fall really quickly into dangerous, like not dangerous, but inflammatory rhetoric, right?
Yeah,
So they stop really arguing the point and more so just try and uh, belittle the other person's point. One of the
yeah.
concerns I kind of have, right, and they address this more directly later in the episode, is Keiko doesn't want to teach the Bajoran faith in her school. That's fine, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
However, by the nature of what she is saying, she is
Yeah,
explaining that the Bajoran faith is not the correct answer. And there are a lot of Bajoran
yeah,
students in that school. So the
yeah.
first big issue is like, okay, the Bajoran people believe that the wormhole aliens are prophets, right?
Hmm.
So if you don't want to teach that they're prophets, that's fine. But when you say, no, they are wormhole aliens, they're just another alien species, that itself is pointing out the opposite is true.
Yeah, basically, what the the best way to go about it is like you like so when we get I remember like school and such, like you use the proper term for like the term that would be used within the context, but you basically say like this is the term they use. We're going to respect that term, but we are not bringing along our that meaning to our understanding of like
Yeah.
basically use the term prophet, but we're not saying they're um yeah. So
I mean,
heads up, everyone.
this is a pretty direct allegory for evolution versus creationism.
Yeah, it is, and like I have so many thoughts about that as well. So everyone, be aware. I'm originally from Tennessee, the state where the Scopes trial happened. This episode pretty well describes what the Scope trial actually was. It was a publicity stunt for that town it was in. Literally, it was a non-issue made an issue. Like pretty much the guy who was charged when he was found guilty got a slap on the wrist, and like it was just a celebrity. Like it's very annoying to me, like what it was because it makes a mockery of both sides effectively. But at least here, what they're going to do is like, okay, you have a larger motivation than just tourism, right? But so it's there's that issue of just like it's obviously an evolutionary like a Scopes trial out allegory, and it's like I have strong opinions about that as a Tennessean. But there's also the fact that like I went to school, everyone, at a public high school in Tennessee that had a class called Bible history. I took that class. That class was studying the Bible not as a religious text, but as a basically a piece of literature, a piece of how the people who were writing these things thought about. Now, I myself am a Christian, so I have a perspective like these people were spoken to through God. But for that class, it's like no. And for my later class in the university, again, it's partially as like a historical examination of the Bible. It's like I have to step back from that and be like, no, this is a secular education. We're looking at this as a cultural like pillar, right? What Kai is suggesting ultimately, like assuming her intentions with this were true, that her main focus was on teaching the faith, that is incorrect. Like what it should be taught as this is what the Bajorans believe about the prophets and the celestial temple, and bring up like this is how we view it as the Federation and such. But these two ideas can coexist, and we can like learn about the Bajoran way to understand them better and understand the importance of it. And that's part of why when I initially watched this episode, I watched it. And I was like, oh, this woman is either a hardline like fanatic of her faith, or she's using this for another like goal. Right? It's very like
Sure.
everything about this was like raising red flags in my brain of like, oh, you're trying to use their faith for your own advantage. Yeah.
Well,
Again, like grew
it
up
is her
Christian.
faith too. She does believe in it. But what I would say is, this first scene generally paints Kai Wynn in the negative. The argumentation that's used is Keiko's being very
Hmm.
open, she's being very tactful about how she speaks, whereas Kai Wynn is a lot more
Hmm.
inflammatory. So obviously,
Yeah.
it says to the viewer that Kai Wynn is in the wrong. However, what we do see
Hmm.
is that Keiko and other people do tend to become just as inflammatory later on. So
Yeah.
really, again, I want to stress, I think this episode does a good job at showing the damage of this. And you mentioned that the writer really just wanted to express the idea that how much he dislikes the idea of trying to influence others into your beliefs. So
Yeah.
it's like I think the biggest like even if we want to take the allegory out of it and say, okay, creationism versus evolution. I believe
Hmm.
in evolution. I think you do too. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I can understand how there is a legitimate worry, especially in this case by the Bajoran people who are struggling,
Hmm.
are literally just coming out of an occupation, and their faith is what held them together. There is a worry that
Yeah.
okay, if you teach people that certain tenets of our faith are not true, that's going to make them question
Yeah.
all the tenets of our faith, and that's
Yeah.
obviously a
So
worry. That's obviously something they should be they're concerned about for probably good reason.
yeah, I think if someone had come to Keiko and like clearly said like, could you please use the term prophet as at least an acknowledgement of like our concerns, I feel like Keiko would have respected it and be like,
100%.
okay, I can
Well,
see.
I don't know if she would have respected it based on what we see somewhat later, but what I would say is, if this was something that Kai Wynn legitimately wanted to push, she probably
Hmm.
would have approached Keiko or even Cisco more privately in a meeting where they discuss
Yeah.
this matter, as opposed to showing
Yeah.
up in the middle of class and like saying, "This is what you should be teaching to start a fight." So,
Yeah.
again, how she kind of starts this whole thing is she wants to start a fight, and she does.
Yep.
So we then move, after this scene. Let's see here. Let's just get a good look at Wynn. I'm pulling her up on the thing. She looks like I don't want to insult the actress, but she very much pulls off that like "you're dead to me" stare. Like she looks
No,
with like
that
the look she gives to Keiko at some points is like, oh, you're saying like somewhat nice things sometimes, but you're looking at this woman, you're like, you're dead to me. Like,
Yeah, literally, I can verify. Like, I've seen that in church. I've seen that in church.
well,
Yeah, that is very accurate to how people like that would look at you. If and it's just like, great acting. Like, Win is a character. Like, I personally love to hate because the actress, I think, it does a really great job of her throughout the series. Like,
oh, 100%.
legitimately.
I don't even necessarily know it's just the actress. The writing for her is very good too. The actress is great,
Oh yeah.
but there are Kai Wen goes on a few arcs in this series,
Oh
and
yeah.
there are some legitimate points where I think, I don't want to spoil anything, but while you might not like her, you begin to kind of understand maybe she is doing something right.
Yeah,
And
like she
there's an element
has
of,
some good
yeah,
motive.
I mean, like you can even draw an allegory to this. Like, although we know that she has ulterior motives, if her motivation was to maintain the faith in her people, making these arguments isn't a good way to go about it. Doing it this way is not a good way to do it, but I understand what you're
Mhm.
trying to do.
Mhm.
And that itself can have its own sort of merit. So now we get the, I don't even want to call it a B plot because it directly ties into the A plot, but we do get a B
Mhm.
plot, and this is a very simple one where O'Brien and Neela are working on some fixes to the fusion reactor, and O'Brien seems to simultaneously be giving her a lesson on how he fixes these things, but also she's not just a student, right? He's teaching her how to do this, but he's also needing her help to fix it. And as they're fixing
Mhm.
it up, he explains that like these specific panels require a specific type of tool to open them as a security measure, and it's called an
Mhm.
EJ7, I suppose, like some sort of device that allows him to open it. And
Yeah.
when he goes to get the device to open it, uh, suddenly he can't find it in his box. And they make a point of,
Yeah,
well,
which
maybe
is
it's missing. Maybe it's missing. He's like, I don't misplace my tools. Which,
yeah.
we know O'Brien at this point. Which, I think something else we'll conclude about this episode is it's very good because a lot of the characters involved are already very characterized. Cisco,
Yeah.
O'Brien, Kira, all these characters, we have a pretty strong understanding of them. So, despite the controversial topic of this episode, we can understand why everyone has the point of view they have. Although, I will say this,
Yeah.
the way Cisco goes about expressing his beliefs in this probably is the best. I really do like some of the
Yeah.
things he says relating to this topic because they're not something you would expect from Star Trek.
Yeah.
So we then get again, that last scene is really just to highlight that a tool is missing, a very important security tool is missing from O'Brien's toolbox. So that's something we're just gonna have to hang on a little bit later for. But then we
Mhm.
get to the Cisco Keiko scene. And Cisco makes a point that he's not surprised. Keiko kind of accuses him, like, you knew this was going to happen. And Cisco says, look, sometimes I wonder if we'll ever be able to find common ground to bring Bejor into the Federation. He's generally speaking on the nature of their faith. They have a very strong faith. And kind of,
Mhm.
you know, this is innate to most sci fi settings. I do wonder, if we ever get to that point of interstellar travel where we're meeting other aliens, what's going to happen
Mhm.
to our own like belief systems that are obviously going to be challenged by like not only experience to alien belief systems, but also just the nature of like, oh, we're made in God's image. Well, what about these other aliens that are just as intelligent as us moving around? Like, they look very different.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those things of just like we have to see when we see, but we could also argue like, oh, well, what about in the past when we met unfamiliar people? Uh, it's like, well, that's not as extreme as
Yeah,
that
that's just what I kind
person.
of mean. Like you're hitting the most extreme point. And I think a lot of sci-fi stuff sort of shows that a lot of faiths will evolve and recontextualize into different points
Oh yeah.
as a means of adapting, surviving, growing into something new. But
Hmm.
with the Bajoran faith being as strong as it is, it's clearly a worry the Federation has about incorporating them into the Federation. It's like, are you going to be able to get along with the rest of the Federation if they don't share your beliefs on how the universe was created, how your people were created, all that sort of stuff. And
Hmm.
let's see.
It,
Um, so then Cisco invites Kira in because obviously Kira has a point here, and I do really like the scene because you have Keiko and Kira going at it in terms of what they're discussing. So,
mhm.
I'm going to read off some of this because I think it's helpful. Kira says that she's heard about the situation in the school, and she, says that like Vedic Win has been meeting with some of the Bajoran civilians about it. Kira explains she's part of an Orthodox order. She has some support to be the next Kai, probably not enough. So, that's an implication that she's a powerful individual, unlikely to be the next Kai, but still like that's power. The fact that you're in the running, right, is significant.
Yeah.
Um, and when Keiko asks, how much support does she have in the station, Kira drops the bomb that, well, she has mine. Uh,
Yeah.
which is interesting because we know how Kira thinks about Kai Wynn later on in the series. And
Well,
Keiko's
this
sort
is
of
the
like,
start of
oh, of course, of course, of course.
yeah.
But what I mean is like, anytime we return to this episode, I'm always kind of surprised. I'm like, oh yeah. Like, you do have a lot of faith in Kai Wen at this point. And I want to point out, like, it's interesting that you have faith in Kai Wen when apparently she's from an Orthodox order and she doesn't have that much support. So I guess that, I don't know if that means Kira's necessarily part of an Orthodox order, but she clearly has faith in Kai Wen in this context.
It's probably a case of she feels very strongly about her belief, and she's constantly worried about its traditions and such being eroded. That should have been something brought up with Cisco earlier. Like, oh, this is a human emissary, right? But basically, she's worried about Bejor's independence, its culture, being lost because of what
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Well, she actually
and so
explains some of her motivation later on in the episode, so I don't know if we want to spoil that just yet. But
yeah, but it's like, yeah, like from what we know, I'm like, yeah, no, I can believe that she would be like at least sympathetic to the Orthodox, I don't want to say Orthodox, yeah, let's just say Orthodox, like conservative Orthodox sort of like leanings of the Bajorans. Um,
yeah, well, so then Keiko sort of challenges her, saying like, you can't possibly believe that teaching facts about the wormhole amounts to blasphemy. Kira says, I do think some revision in the school curriculum might be appropriate. You have a lot of Bajoran children. And Keiko
mhm,
says, I'm not going to let a Bajoran spiritual leaders dictate what can and can't be taught in the classroom. And Kira then says, like, well, then maybe we need two schools on the station, one for the Bajoran children and one for the Federation. Cisco says,
yeah,
like, if we start separating Bajoran and Federation interests, and then Kira sort of interjects, saying, a lot of Bajoran and Federation interests are separate, Commander. I've been telling you this all along. And Cisco basically says, nobody's saying that there can't be spiritual teachings on the station, Major, but it can't be in addition to what's taught in Miss O'Brien's classroom. Uh, Kira says, but they're fundamentally different beliefs. And Keiko's like, well, I'm not teaching philosophy, and she's like, I'm teaching science. And then Kira challenges, saying, some might, and she says this very smugly, I want to point out. Let me see if I can get like her expression where
yeah,
she says this. Um,
smuggy.
well, uh, let's see. Yeah, it's like this expression here. Some might say that pure science without a spiritual context is a philosophy. Um,
Mm.
let's see. And Cisco says, my philosophy is that there's room for all philosophies on the station. Now, how do you suggest we deal with this? And Kira says, I'm not sure if you can. So,
Yeah.
I think this is another pretty good dialogue. Uh, what we're kind of seeing now is, I think, a little bit of the eroding of Keiko's moral high ground, right? Because, in the first
Hmm.
interaction with Kai Wen was being fairly unreasonable, and Keiko was being fairly reasonable. Uh, but
Hmm.
now we're sort of seeing a challenge. I mean, let's be fair, the Bajorans kind of capitulated immediately. It's like, look, we'll just teach our own children in a different school. What's the harm in that, right? And they're like, well, no, we're trying to integrate these two societies. We don't want them to be separated, right? Part of the reason for the school as it was introduced is it helps unify people by raising a generation of people of people from different backgrounds and species interact with one another.
Hmm.
So, if you raise Federation kids with Bajoran kids, those kids will grow up to, understand each other's beliefs and understand each other's way of living. And then ideally, they'll be tolerant of it and willing to work with them. Now the
Hmm.
Bajorans are saying, well, look, if you're going to teach systems that are antithetical to our beliefs, we'll just go to our own school, right? Like, you know, obviously, again, if we have to go back to the allegory of creationism versus evolution, part of the biggest concern was like, look, if you want to teach creationism as opposed to evolution, go to your own school, right? Like, you can go to your own Catholic school or Christian school, or private school that teaches that sort of thing. But
Hmm.
in public school, we're teaching evolution.
Hmm.
And, that was the concern, is because you would have people trying to change the curriculum for all students to appease the ones like of a certain group. Whereas
Yeah.
now, in this case, the Bajorans are more than willing to say, "Look, we don't actually want to change what you're teaching. Go ahead and teach what you want. But if you're not gonna listen to our requests for what should be taught, we're just gonna go start our own school." Right? Like, there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that on the surface. I mean, it goes against what the purpose of the school is. Cisco doesn't want that as the outcome, but the Bajorans
Hmm.
aren't making demands of the Federation.
Hmm.
So, I
At
mean,
least not explicitly. At least not explicitly.
obviously,
Like,
there's the idea, if they understand the social pressure this is going to put, and doing this is effectively forcing the hand of the Federation. That's one thing. What I would say, though, is if we're sort of just reading it as it is, which is the Bajoran people are saying, look, we just don't like what you're teaching, but we don't want to necessarily change it, so we're just going to go to our own school. And now the Federation's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're not just going to go to your own school, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
now you've kind of blocked off all alternatives. Not only are we not going to
There's
teach what
actually
you...
another issue. There's
Well,
actually another
let me finish my
issue.
point before you get to that. Basically, they just cut off all avenues, right? Not only are we going to teach beliefs that are antithetical to your beliefs in our schools, we're now also not going to allow you to teach your kids at your own schools. It's like,
There,
already we're seeing the fall of the Federation's moral high ground on this matter.
yeah, there's another issue of the fact of like this is not a Federation station; it's a Bajoran station that they just happen to let the Federation run for them, and it's like now they're being told that, yeah, we're not gonna let you do it, like let your people do what would normally be a reasonable thing on your own like soil, right? It's like ooh,
Well,
and
and
like
I mean, the jurisdiction or the nature of the station is always something that's a little bit ambiguous, right? It's obviously in the Bajoran system, quote unquote. It is their own soil, right? Like the Bajorans have like stations on multiple moons and I think a few planets in this system. So it's not
yeah,
just it has to be on the planet Bejor. The stations in their system, but the Federation does run it, right? So the school is run by the Federation, right? The teacher's a member of the Federation. It was started by the Federation, So,
mhm,
but what I'm sort of saying here is like, really, in this context with this conversation, I don't 100% like what Kira is saying. It's a little bit too on the nose. It's a little bit too smug. I can understand someone saying these things in this context, but
mhm.
she personally is not extending the olive branch to the Federation, but at the same time, she's basically saying like, look, our beliefs are separate. Let's separate them. And you know, the Federation doesn't even want that. So it's like, how is the Federation morally justified in what they're doing right now? They're kind of not. Like, in the first dialogue with this, the Federation, represented by Keiko, was in the right. Now it's like, oh, it's a little
But
bit more murky.
now,
Now it's a little bit more
yeah,
murky. So I do, again, I want to stress, I really do like how this episode sort of handles these topics. And Keiko's clearly getting more frustrated, right? Like she's unhappy with Kira. You can kind of see it in the still I have of the episode right now. She's kind of glaring at Kira. She is not happy that Kira is siding with Kai Wynn in this context. Because this is also a representation that some of the leadership of this station believes in what Kai Wynn is saying.
yeah,
This isn't just some lady from Bejor coming here to say this is how you should teach in your schools. This is no, these are effectively one of the people who allow me to teach on the station. Like, it's not Cisco, so
mhm,
it's not like the big guy, but at the same time, she's second in command here. So,
yeah,
all right. So
yeah.
like let's see. So Cisco kind of gets tired of them and he decides to go to the Bajoran shrine on the station. Where he talks with
Mhm.
Kai Wynn. And this is the first time Kai Wynn and Cisco meet. It's also the first time Wynn meets the emissary, although we later learn she doesn't really put too much stock in Cisco as the emissary. However, right now she's saying, I can't tell you how much I've looked forward to this moment. I'm honored to meet the emissary of the prophets. And Cisco says, if you let me know you were coming, Kai Wynn, I would have greeted you sooner. And she's like, oh, but this is such an insignificant visit. And he's like, I don't think it is. And of course, he's sort of saying that in a sense of like, I think you intended to come here and do something, so I don't think it's insignificant. But she interprets it as, oh, thank you so much. Like,
Mhm.
I do like how it's a little bit of a double speak here, right? Like Cisco's basically saying like, I'm kind of questioning your honesty here, and
Your
she's like,
motivation.
I'm just gonna take that as a compliment. Like she's
Yeah.
very clearly twisting the words because if he's not gonna be direct, she's gonna interpret it as she wants.
She she
Um,
might not be a Kardashian, but she learned the Kardashian way pretty well.
Well,
It's like,
yeah, that's actually sort of that's probably a big thing. Is there's a lot of Bajorans who know how Cardassians function, so maybe some of them are a little bit more dubious than we like. But Cisco then makes the point of like, look, I wish you wouldn't call me that. I'm Commander Cisco or Benjamin if you like. So he's obviously trying to be friendly. He's trying to extend that knowledge branch, and I think is this really the first direct statement we have that he does not like his position as emissary?
I think so. I cannot genuinely like exactly remember, but it seems like this would be like the first time like like sort of absurdly like I would rather you don't do that. I'd rather you
Yeah,
use this.
and
But
obviously that's a big deal because as uncomfortable as some Bajorans might be giving him that title, the fact that he's rejecting it is probably not a compliment.
yeah, like
And again, this is why I think something like this should be demonstrated earlier on in the season. Like having Cisco explain to us what Cisco's exact feelings are relating to his position in this faith is probably something that would inform a lot of how the members of that faith, notably Kira, react around him.
mm-hmm.
Right? If someone is named the Messiah of your faith, and then he says, "Well, I don't want to be the Messiah," that might not sit right with you. You might be like, "Oh, well, I guess
Mm-hmm.
like that's weird, but all right." Like so I think that would have been nice to have him more directly state that, even if we can maybe infer it. At least now we know that
Yeah,
he is open and willingly saying, "I'm not comfortable with this."
yeah,
So, uh, she says that, "Oh, the course the prophets chose for us might not always be comfortable, but we must follow it." And then she grabs his ear. He looks just as uncomfortable about that. And of course, it's funny. Well, actually, no. She reaches for his ear, and then she says, "May I?" and takes it. Uh, let's see. And after a moment, she said, "Ah, still a disbeliever." Uh, and she says she once asked Kyle Paka why a disbeliever was destined to seek the prophets, and she told me one should never look into the eyes of one's own gods. She said, "I disagree. I told her I would do anything to look into their eyes." Kyle Paka suggested that I sit in darkness for a day, and quite properly so. She cannot be replaced, and I miss her deeply. So, this is another issue, I think, with this episode.
mm-hmm.
Remember, Kyle Paka is stuck on a distant planet now on battle lines. She can't leave because she died on that planet, and
And the nanites,
the
yeah,
nanites keep her
yeah,
alive. Leaving the planet would kill her. Effectively, Cisco got their Kai killed. Like he was in charge of
yeah.
the mission.
I mean, she could be implicitly saying something about that of just like, but she doesn't
Oh,
want to
she's
come.
bringing it
She
up.
wants to see. Yeah, yeah. What I'm saying is, she might be trying to like, make him feel guilty and see if that will get her way, at least in part. Assuming her way is what she says of like, oh, I want this to be taught in the schools. But uh, and part of that is like, okay, make Cisco feel guilty to like sort of like subtly manipulate him to see her side. Like, oh, we've already taken so much from these people, we should give them this so that they don't lose everything because of our actions.
So
Um,
I think that's a
sorry.
very good point. The only issue I would have with that is we have gotten no reaction from the Bajoran people relating to the death of their Kai.
Yeah, yeah. Only
So
Kira
yeah, and
briefly.
yeah, and even then, that was only during that episode, right? Like, if you skip that episode and just say Kyle Paka died off screen, no one would know the difference. It is a bit of an
Yeah,
issue. So, like, honestly, I would simply say it. This episode would probably be strengthened if that topic was brought up more. I would love it if she had said
yeah.
like, you know, you were the last person to see Kyle Paka. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she didn't go on that runabout with you. Things that don't, obviously she wants to earn Cisco's favor. She wouldn't want to outright blame him, but you're right. She would
Hmm.
want to guilt him. She would want to be like,
Yeah.
how can I use this against you? And of course,
Hmm.
that would go a long way of also suggesting why Cisco might not have as much faith by the Bajoran people. I mean, he killed
Hmm.
effectively their Kai, one everyone loved, right? Like,
Yeah.
because we know we meet Barile in a little bit, and he's more or less diametrically opposed to Kai Wynn, and we
Hmm.
have Kira, who we also sort of learn has a very different sort of view of a lot of the Bajoran faith, and all three of them loved Kyle Paka, right? Like, so Kyle Paka is loved by all sectors of the Bajoran faith, it seemed. So it's probably this really should have been something used more. I think it's kind of a loss that this series didn't touch upon this topic more. You know,
Mhm.
we could have removed Dramatis Personae to have some more stuff about this, but unfortunately, we're here. Uh,
You're very bitter about that, aren't you?
it's such a
You're
bad
very.
episode. Like Dax might be worse, but at least there's an attempt of using the episode Dax to explain the character. You don't get anything from Dramatis
Yeah.
Personae. I've ranted about that enough.
Yeah.
Um, all right,
Um.
so let's
See.
see.
Yeah. I will
Anything
give.
else of it?
Yeah, I will agree. Dax. Like basically starts us off for like trying to understand the trill. Like because we had the initial trill in uh TNG, and that's like a different portrayal, like what they look like, and we didn't get a lot of like their culture
Well,
and such.
I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
use Dax as a great example for anything. That the point I was just trying to make is like at least that episode is trying to get
Yeah.
us to better understand Dax of the Trill. Like there's
Hmm.
like on paper, right? Okay, what's this episode about, boys? Okay, we're gonna do an episode about Dax. Cool. We need to learn more about the character. She's pivotal to the series. Let's do it. It didn't work
Hmm.
out well. Dramatis Personae is what if we just have everyone act out of character? It's like
Except for
ah,
Odo.
except for Odo. But okay, let's stop with that, or else I'm gonna go on forever. Anyway,
Anyways, yeah.
um, Cisco says that like it's very important that we resolve these problems at the school, and Wynn says the prophets have spoken to me through the orbs. Emissary, I understand my duty to defend the Bajoran faith. The teacher has dishonored the celestial temple. If she does not recant, I cannot be responsible for the consequences. And of course, this is delivered in a moderately threatening way.
Yeah.
So, um, I mean, again, like this, we see Keiko's sort of moral high ground fall, but we never really see Kai Wynn show any sort of like better position here. This episode really does a good job, uh, breaking down both sides and examining it. You know,
Mhm.
I don't want to get too deep into this because it's a bigger topic, but a lot of people will criticize more modern Star Trek for being a lot more shallow in any of its political commentary. So,
Mhm.
um, I don't want to necessarily get into it. I don't want to talk about like a lot of that stuff because that feels just like opening a can of worms. But here,
Mhm.
it's like neither side is presented in a good way, and ultimately there is a deeper point being said than the surface read of what it's an allegory for.
Mhm.
So, um, we then return back to the B plot where Neela makes a point. Let's see. They're trying to scan for this tool. They're trying to find out where, like, it might be. So I guess they're looking for the components that it's made of, and they find it inside a power conduit. And when they get there, they find the let's see, they find the molten metal on the floor. Uh, it is the missing interlock, like wrench. It's melted. They also find organic material. It turns out this was someone who took the wrench and got vaporized in the power conduit. Let's
Mhm.
see. I'm trying to find. Oh, Ensign Aquino is the person who accessed the power conduit, and essentially they conclude that he must have borrowed O'Brien's wrench or O'Brien's interlock wrench to open up the like panels, and somehow he got fried because of a power conduit misfire or something like that.
Mhm.
And as a result, like that's why it went missing. That's why it was destroyed. And it also needs to be pointed out because it's kind of important for later. They make a point that it's a titanium composite that looks like the interlock.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that might be an implication that it's not exactly that interlock. Because they also make a point in this scene that when they were doing the scan for the materials, the titanium composite, they found sources of it inside one of the lockers, but that's where the other ones are stored. So they know it's in there. They know those ones are in there. There's multiples of these. Um,
Mhm.
and O'Brien makes a point that it's weird that Aquino did this. Even if he was trying to fix a problem when I was off duty, he wouldn't have borrowed my tools. That's just bad form. Um,
Yeah.
and the Keiko kind of says like, look, this might have just been an accident, and apparently Bashir is examining the remains to see what's going on with that. And when they get out to the promenade while talking about this, they try and go buy some Jamja sticks, and the Bajoran selling them refuses to sell to the two of them. Now,
Oh boy.
sometimes when I read this scene, my interpretation was like Are the Bajorans basically going like super racist towards Federation people, i.e., mostly humans? But it also could literally just be they just don't like Keiko because she's right there.
Oh, yeah. I no. See, the Bajorans are stand-in for the Star Trek fan base. Obviously, obviously.
Oh God. Well, so
I'm correct.
just the way it's presented is the vendor. I mostly feel like I mostly jokingly feel it's them being racist because the way they're responding to this is to O'Brien, not to Keiko. So it feels like this is unwarranted, but it's clearly because Keiko's there. And Keiko realizes it. O'Brien gets pretty mad. He like grabs the guy's shirt and tries to pull him over. Odo steps in and breaks them up. And we ask, like, what's going on here? The guy's like, I don't want to sell them my Jomja sticks. I have every right not to. And Odo's like, well, why wouldn't you want to? I do like Odo when
Yeah, he's
he's
kind of
very.
confused.
Well, it's not he's just confused. He's very good at asking questions that get to the core point of it. It's like, you say you
Yeah,
don't want to sell it to him, but that wasn't really what I was looking for. I want you to tell me why.
yeah.
But Keiko just wants the entire thing to just end. She quickly realizes this is kind of my fault. Uh, and as they walk out, they find that there are a bunch of Bajoran children surrounded by Kai Wen, or Kai Wen is surrounded by a bunch of children. And let's
I'm
see.
sorry. I'm just imagining. Okay, we have the meme for this episode, folks. I'm gonna make a giant Kai Wynn banner and just put it over a bunch of Bajoran children,
Why
just
are you? Why are you
enveloping
like
them.
this? Why are you?
Because you
Why are?
say shit like that.
Why are you like this? Oh God.
Hey, that's the Amazing Digital Circus reference I was hoping
Yes,
for.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. This means that you're the really annoying bubble that just licks the dirt on the ground.
Annoying? He is a national treasure. How dare you?
Either way. Um, let's see. Okay, so they get back over to the school, and Wynn says, if we abandon the prophets, then everything we have. Uh, hold on, wait, what's the actual line? Because I think this is a misread of the transcript. Let's see. She just gets cut
He's
off
looking.
because she sees Keiko walk up and she cuts herself off to say, "Oh, Miss O'Brien's here now." Uh, And Wynn says it's a pleasure to meet. She meets O'Brien. She says it's a pleasure to meet you. I've just been hearing many wonderful things about your wife from the parents of these children. She apparently is an excellent teacher. O'Brien's defending his wife. Yes, she is, and she doesn't deserve what you're doing to her. Wynn says, I feel your anger towards me, and I forgive you for it. Like it's such a fuck you line. Like
Yeah.
it's like he's angry. He's like, I feel like you're in the wrong here. You're attacking my wife. You're cruel. And she's like, I forgive you for being mad at me. It's like
Oh
it's
my
so
god.
it's so much a I don't give a shit what you think.
This feels like a line that one of your players in your game, if we were higher minded, like big brain, we would actually say that as a comeback because that pretty regularly encapsulates our feelings towards characters who are mad at us. It's like, eh,
No,
eh.
no, no. You just
But
constantly insult the villains I throw out against you. You're like, oh, you're a villain. You're here to kill me, loser. And I'm like, guys, he's supposed to be intimidating. Please,
no,
role
no,
plays
no,
you're
that's
intimidated.
mostly, in my defense, that's mostly egg. That's mostly
No,
egg.
no, you don't get to throw this off. You're the same fucking way.
No, I'm innocent. I'm a golden child.
Oh God. All right, let's see here. So yeah, she says, Miss O'Brien, if I've misjudged you, I am terribly sorry. Um, is there a place in your school for the prophets? And Keiko says, no. Uh, let's see here. I just had a problem because my headsets just told me the battery's low. So, Pike, rattle off what the rest of the scene happens. I'm gonna grab my backup headset.
Oh fuck! I just closed the fucking transcript. So, it's basically a case of Keiko kind of just says reasonably of like, no, that's not my job. It's that's your job. And like again, while Keiko has some problems here in terms of like how she posts her thoughts, it's like
All right, I am back. How do I sound? Okay, good. Uh, I I just really hope you haven't been saying terrible things while I've been gone. Yeah, and I think kind of to the point that I was bringing up earlier, because we see this again where the Bajoran side of this argument capitulates. Right? Initially, it was like, don't teach them the wrong thing. Teach them what we believe. Oh, you don't want to do that? Fine, we'll go to our own schools. Oh, we're not allowed to do that? Fine. Why don't you just not teach this particular topic? Right? We don't care if you teach them math or history or science, but when it comes to the wormhole, ignore it. And you know, well, and again, Keiko kind of refuses. And while I agree that Keiko shouldn't, like, it's obviously best that these kids get all points of view. And in the case of the Bajoran faith, I wouldn't say that Keiko has to teach it, but we are seeing the Bajorans at every point relent at like what they're asking for. Now, of course, what they move to is a different issue entirely, but how this presents itself is Keiko is adamant. No, I'm going to teach your kids what I believe, not what you believe. And it's like, okay, that's not acceptable to us. And again, that's just why this is a fundamental issue. It's why it's a huge issue even today in the real world, where, when you get to how does like someone's beliefs in their faith when they go to public school, how is it like going to be challenged by the things they learn there? And is it right to challenge those things? Or should parents have some sort of say in how they can maybe reduce how their kid is exposed to that? But how it kind of comes across here is Keiko is adamant about teaching, children who are not hers, children who are not in the Federation beliefs. I mean, again, uh, I want to stress that I'm on Keiko's side in terms of like the nature of what I believe, in terms of like the non secular, the non religious viewpoint, right? But I distinctly want to bring up something. I think it's in season 5 when Garrick and Quark are having a conversation about the nature of the Federation and how there's a fairly unintended, insidious method in which the Federation consumes all cultures. Um, and this would be one of them, right? Hey guys, we're going to open a school and your kids could attend for free. Oh, that sounds great. We are going to teach them our faith and our beliefs, though. It's like, ooh, that's not okay. Well, you're not allowed to build another school. You're not allowed to not learn it. And we're going to teach them our way. It's like, oh, are the Federation the good guys in this context? Well, I don't think there are good guys. One thing that I want to point out is this is not really a situation where both the positive sides are presented. It's actually both the negative sides. There was there was an episode. It's not a great episode, but it's from TNG season 1 or 2, I think. Season 2, I believe. Where it always sticks in my head because I think it was one of the first big ones where I was a little bit more keenly aware and I had an opinion on the political issue somewhat being debated. It's the episode when Wesley accidentally destroys a flower bed. Yeah, yeah. For anyone who hasn't necessarily seen that episode, essentially, uh, the Enterprise finds a planet that's keen on joining the Federation, and The crime on this planet is functionally zero. It's a veritable paradise. But then they learn, although it's the rules of it are very stupid, but basically any crime committed is punishable by death. And there's no jury, there's none of that. Literally, as Wesley is found by one of the enforcement officers, the guy starts pulling out like a euthanasia needle. Now, I don't want to get too deep into that episode, but that episode's obviously about the nature of the death penalty. And the episode ends with both sides really presenting the arguments of why the death penalty, like why their position is the good position, right? Where the Federation makes the point that, hey, the death penalty didn't work for us. We view it as cruel and unusual, so we abolished it. The planet makes the point that, hey, clearly it's worked for us. You called us a paradise. And this is one of the things we attribute to that. And, the moral of the episode isn't that the death penalty is right or wrong. It ended up being more a punishment applied absolutely is absolutely unjust. So, but the thing that's, good about that episode is it presents the positives of both sides. We don't see that here. We are seeing the negatives of both sides. Both sides have problems that are wrong. So I just think that's an interesting way of looking at it, right? We're breaking down both sides and focusing not on the positives of them. We're focusing on the negatives of these philosophies and how they're, not good on their own, or they can really kind of have these more unintended effects on society that aren't necessarily good for the other side. Yeah. So then, Kai Wynn sort of ends this saying, like, look, I've tried being reasonable. And she leads the Bajorans away, leaving only 5 Federation children behind to attend class. Which, I mean, this is a little weird because there's not really that many students in the classroom whenever we see it. I think we only see it like 2 or 3 times after it gets started. And we don't ever see like too many students. But I want to point out that, like, oh, wait, Nong's not in the school anymore, so that's another thing too. But when the school started, it had like 4 kids in it. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's not good that all these children are taken away, but it's not like there's really an issue that you only have 5. You started with 5. You started with less. I mean, it highlights the point that, like, well, I think this highlights the point even more so that the Federation are a little bit in the wrong here. The majority of the students have an issue. The majority of the families of the students have an issue with this. This isn't like, 1 or 2 students in your classroom has this problem. No, it's a majority. It's a significant majority. I'm not saying a classroom should be a democracy in regards to what you teach. At the same time, this is not an issue that Keiko kind of wants to brush their viewpoints under the rug, saying, we're just going to teach it our way, and you can teach them your way, after school. No. A majority of your class is Bajoran students, right? So, like, is there not any sort of maybe moral question about, like, how you should teach these students in regards when a majority of them follow a certain faith and you teach the antithesis of that faith? Is there not kind of an issue there? I don't know. I think like this episode does a pretty good job at portraying both sides as having positives and negatives, and it's a visual way of conveying that. Ultimately, Keiko, you're losing out here because you're adamant about teaching the way you want to teach. In the hopes of teaching these kids the whole truth, you're now not getting to teach most of them anything. If she had capitulated even a little bit, right? Oh, just don't teach about the wormhole. I'm not saying that would have been good because that would have basically given Kai Wynn the ability to basically say, okay, now next time we have an issue, we're just going to come here and do the same thing. Like, I'm not saying giving them a win is good, right? But what I am saying is you didn't win on this either. Neither of you won. In fact, the only people who are really losing right now are the kids. So let's see. All of them leave, and it really just leaves the 5 students. I want to see if I can get a picture of them. That's so funny because, like, I know this is like, it's supposed to be like the frontier school where they have like a small schoolhouse that all the kids are different ages and learn in. But it is funny because Jake looks significantly older than all these kids. It's like, yes, I get to attend class with these toddlers. Oh, but wait, the small kids could fit in the really tiny holes though. So the older you are, the better you got paid, right? But the smaller you were, the higher chance you had at earning a bonus. Exactly. It's like being a manager of a bunch of salesmen versus being the salesman. Except in this case, the salesmen are toddlers that you're throwing down a mine. No, we send a regular canary. Although I'm glad you mentioned that because I remember I recently read about it. This is entirely a tangent and it's just going to extend the episode. Uh, there was an invention, a device. It was a canary resuscitation device, like made for the sole purpose of bringing the canary, like helping the canaries, survive after they've passed out from the. Because if for anyone who doesn't know, because I guess there might be some people who don't, the whole canary in the coal mine thing was you'd bring a canary down there with you, because the canary being smaller and having weaker lungs, if there's toxins in the air or if the air quality became too low, the canary would pass out and die. And that once that happened, that was a sign that it's starting to become dangerous for the miners. So that then they would go back up for air or figure out a new method of mining that area. Well, that means they're miners. They're miners. Um, well, you know what? And I articulated the joke. So really, who did more? Who did more work there? Wait, Ted Turner? No, no, no. I explained it. You provided the substance. I gave it form. We're a comedic duo here, Pike. You see, nothing's more funny than the fact that you're getting so riled up over this tiny joke. I reduce everything that I touch. All right. Anyway, so we get to a next scene. I do like the how this is kind of going because there's this murder mystery that's basically going on in the background now. So they make a point that Aquino tried to fix the Condat array when it reactivated, killing him. Uh, they make a point that this is possibly just an accident that happened. These Cardassians only encrypt those power conduits with one flow regulator per level. Could have realigned accidentally. Um, Although Dax makes a point that he doesn't sound convinced, and O'Brien says, like, again, he brings up the point of, there's no reason Aquino would have used my tools without my permission. There was no need to. The issue he wanted to fix could have waited until I was up so he could have asked to borrow my tool or had me do it. So there is some issue here that is just not adding up. And yeah, so Odo basically catches the hint that there might be something suspicious here, and he goes to investigate. And then Jake comes in wanting to talk to Cisco, and this is actually probably my favorite scene in the episode. So Jake comes in and he says, there was only me and four of the kids, but they still kept the school open. And Keiko changed the lesson to Galileo, and they said, "Do you know that he was tried by the Inquisition for teaching that the Earth moved around the sun?" So first thing I want to point out is, again, we can see how kind of bitter and Keiko's getting here, right? It's like, I'm going to change the lesson to teach these kids about a situation that paints me in the right here. Like, Again, I don't think she's wrong. Like, this is obviously relevant to what they're going through, so it's not like a bad thing to teach. But it can kind of come across as a little bit petty. Not even like in a bad way. I understand why she's doing it this way, right? But it's just an issue of like, again, I think it's really kind of showing the breakdown of Keiko's position in all of this. Really the Federation's position in all of this. And Cisco says, like, yep, I knew he was tried and convicted. His books are burned. And Jake says, how can people be so stupid? And this is where I really like what Cisco's doing. This is something that, to me, really makes Cisco as a character, especially in a series that's a lot more morally gray than TNG. Cisco says, it's easy to look back 7 centuries and judge what was right and wrong. And Jake says, but it's the same thing that's happening now with all this stuff about Celestial Temple and the wormhole. It's dumb. And Cisco says, no, it's not. You've got to realize something, Jake. For over 50 years, the one thing that allowed the Bajorans to survive the Cardassian occupation was their faith. The prophets were their only source of hope and courage. And Jake says, but there are no prophets. They're just some aliens that you found in the wormhole. And Cisco says, no. To those aliens, the future is no more different than we see the past. Why shouldn't they be considered prophets? And Jake says, are you serious? And Cisco says, look, my point is, it's a matter of interpretation. It may not be what you believe, but that doesn't make it wrong. If you start to think that way, you'll be acting just like Vedic Win is, only from the other side. We can't afford to think that way, Jake. We'd lose everything we worked for. And Jake says, you're worried, aren't you? Well, what are you going to do? And Cisco's like, look, I'm not sure, but I got to find some help. I mean, I like this scene because, obviously it's a nice father-son scene where he's teaching his son about, how you're supposed to look at other beliefs and how you're supposed to understand the world and how, you have to sort of understand that sometimes you're looking at an issue from a point of view that the other people can't see. So you can't always judge them based on that. And he's also, at the same time, Jake being his son and knowing his father well enough, he's able to pick up how worried his father is. This is a pretty good scene. I mean, this puts this episode in a pretty high bar for me because we get some nice moments where, we see, again, it's really nice to see Cisco, obviously the highest Federation officer here, really kind of put into perspective how the Federation is supposed to look at these things, right? When you're going off and finding these aliens and they all think and behave differently and they have different views and different faiths, you have to understand that it's like, look, you have your way of doing things. I might not agree with it, but I should at least try and understand it and not preemptively judge you for it. There might be extremes, right? Where it's like, if this alien species is like, yeah, we like to consume babies. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're not necessarily going to be tolerant of that, buddy. But, and one thing, that really highlights that point is he doesn't just say, oh, we need to be tolerant of other beliefs. He explains why in this context it is important to understand and tolerate them, right? It's like, we are tolerant of their faith because we understand how important it is to them, and here is why it's important to them. Right? It's not just blind tolerance, right? I think, blind tolerance is probably just as detrimental as blind ignorance, right? Here, it is informed tolerance. So, is an understanding of why we need to respect this position they have. And, it's just generally a good lesson to teach, and I think it's really well contextualized, and it's a father teaching a son. All right, good. I'm glad you agree. But yeah, so Cisco's off to find more help. And oh my god, we're talking about this episode so long. I didn't realize we'd be talking about it so much. Yeah. Well, so then we get to the monastery. And we will meet Vedic Baral. The what? Yeah, so this guy is very different from how we see a lot of other people. I mean, hell, the first thing that happens is Cisco leans forward and presents his ear. And Baral's just like, you don't need to pay tribute to me. And Cisco's like, well, usually when I meet these spiritualers, the first thing they do is grab my ear. And he's like, yeah, it's unpleasant, isn't it? It's like, I remember as a child, well, let's see. One of the monks, he would just always grab my ear. And, because I was a kid who acted up, and I was his favorite victim. I swore it would be my life's goal to do away with that archaic ritual. So clearly, if Wynn is meant to be the more orthodox person, this guy's a lot more of a, I don't want to say new age, but He's very much in the realm of like, look, some of these traditions are not necessary. Yeah, reformer is the best term, but I mean, we don't even know much of what he thinks. I don't know if I dislike the wanting to do away with the ear thing, because supposedly they can actually sense someone's paw via that. So that seems weird that you would do away with that practice. You know, it's like there's well, I mean, I no, I feel like it does. I mean, we've seen examples where people are like they. I know we saw it with Opaka. At one point, she would grab Cisco's ear and she would actually sense some element of his emotional state via the touching of his ear. Like episode one, Emissary shows that she doesn't like read his mind, but she clearly gets some sort of reading off of him. So I mean, this maybe it's maybe the thing that's archaic about it, it's just like the nature of just grabbing someone's ear like that. You know, maybe if it's more of a ritual of like, hey, can you like feel my paw? Or, like, if it'd be like if you go to some sort of like confession or consulting with a Vedic, right? If you intentionally go there for that, they can then be like, all right, can I feel your paw? And then like, you present your ear sort of deal, as opposed to, hey, this is our version of a handshake where I just grab your ear. No, I know, but like, I just meant as a form of like when like Cisco said, whenever he meets a religious leader, they just go for his ear, right? No, sure, that's what I meant. Like they just go for it like it's a handshake, right? Like when Kai Wynn went up to Cisco for the first time, she starts reaching for his ear and says, "May I?" Like, but she's already mid reach, right? So that I was just making a joke that that's effectively their handshake is like, "Oh, hi," grabs ear. So maybe that's the way he looks at it. But Baral says, let's see. Um, oh yeah, so Cisco basically says, yeah, I've been far too polite to say, don't grab my ear. And when he says he wants to do away with the archaic tradition, Cisco's like, well, you'll have my support and the Federation support. Let's see. And one thing Baral makes a point of is he originally started working here just as a gardener, and he says, unfortunately, the prophets ordained me for other avenues or other stations. So obviously they're presenting this guy as incredibly humble, incredibly like, I just wanted the garden, but apparently I needed to do this. Let's see. Supposedly he is also the leading candidate for the next Kai. Let's see. And this is where we get the line that I do think should have been present earlier on the series. Where Baral says, "Some fear you as the symbol of a federation they view as godless. Some fear you as the emissary who has walked with the prophets, and some fear you because Vedic Wynn told them to. We're all very good. We're all very good at conjuring up enough fear to justify whatever we want to do. Today, I'm not only a Vedic. If the prophets will it, someday I may be Kai, and I can be a better friend to you then." Because this is him basically saying, like, look, I can't help you. Yeah, because Cisco's like, look, I need your help. If you're going to be the next Kai, I would really help if you made some sort of point to shut down Win. He's like, look, I can't do that. You're basically persona non grata right now. We don't want it. It's like me even talking to you here might cause problems. Um, and and then of course Cisco says, like, in other words, being my friend now might hurt your chances. And Baral says the prophets teach us patience. Again, like, I don't think it intends it this way, and I believe this is more of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing of like, yeah, why don't you just why don't you just not like worry about it right now? I'm sure everything will work out. And Cisco then sort of counters with a, it appears they also teach you politics. So fairly fairly snide back and forth. There's a lot of good lines in this episode. Just like Vedic Win being very much in the realm of like snarky, but also able to deflect any sort of criticism towards her as criticism of the other person. And now Baral saying, like, look, I'd love to help you, but I'm not gonna right now. Don't worry, in the future I might. So, I liked how you made the point of, being under the Cardassians so long might have actually taught them a thing or two about politics, and it's very clear that it has. Oh, I can't wait till we get to that one episode where we meet the other guy who met the prophets, if you remember what I'm talking about. The much more traditionalist Bajoran sort of person. Um, anyway, so Cisco then has to return to the station because Baral is unfortunately not helpful right now. And when he does, it turns out all the Bajoran crewmen have decided to call out sick. And I really like this scene. So Cisco, like Kira says this. Kira says they all call out sick, and Cisco gets all up close and angry. Like he starts like looking down at her and says, "Do you think it's contagious, Major?" Like he's actually challenging. He's like, "I know what they're doing." And Kira's like, "It's too early to tell." And Cisco says, "Like, are your people willing to throw everything that we've accomplished during these past 7 months?" And Kira says, "Everyone knows the Federation leaves, the Cardassians will be back." And Cisco says, with all due respect, Major, protecting your borders is not my primary reason. The Federation is not the primary reason the Federation's here, and it's not why I'm here. I'm here to build a trusting relationship with your people, and I'd like to start feeling that somebody on your side is giving back that effort. This is basically, if it started off as a little bit of like witty back and forth of like, hey, where's your people? Oh, they're all out sick. Oh, really? Now it's just like, all right, shut up and listen. I know what you're doing. And she says, I think I've given you all the support I can, short of, and he cuts her off. It's not enough. Like, I want to stress, this is a fierce Cisco we get here. This is top form Cisco. He is not taking anyone's bullshit. Remember, this is the guy who punched Q. This is a guy who, directly to his face, he caused Picard to flinch. Right? This is why, like, we needed more episodes of Cisco in this season, because this is a man who is quite intimidating, quite imposing. There's a reason why he is, like, obviously Picard, phenomenal captain, right? I understand entirely why he's captain. But when it comes to Cisco, he is not as much a diplomat so much as he is a commander, right? And I mean that more in the sense of, like, he tells people what to do. And he does it in a way that makes you listen. So, she's like, oh, we'll try and help. He's like, no, it's not enough. And she's like, oh, I thought there was room for all philosophies on the station. He says, you tell our sick Bajoran crewmen, he ignores her question entirely. It's like, you tell those crewmen that they better get here immediately or they'll recover on their way to their next assignment. And Kira just has to acknowledge, yes, sir. Like, she's trying to make some excuse. She's trying to defend her point of view, and he's just not having any of it. He's like, I'm done. Let's see. Oh, and in this, the scene ends with Bashir having returned back with some data. It turns out that, let's see, Aquino did not die inside the power conduit. They found out that someone had actually shot him with a phaser. They figured this out through technobabble. And apparently it was a phaser set to kill, so he was murdered. He was murdered, and his body was moved there and properly disposed of. And one thing I do like is, despite sort of the confrontation with Kira that Cisco just had, once the issue of murder comes up, she's back in there working with everyone to try and figure out what this is. There's not even any hint of the other plot line, basically, right? It's like, okay, a murder has happened. We got to address it. So they make a point. Let's see. Initially Cisco says, do we think this has anything to do with the school? And Kira says, if you're suggesting that this has anything to do with the Bajoran people, and Cisco cuts her off saying, or Bashir cuts her off saying, the analysis proves this happened before Vedic Wind arrived. So, I guess contrary to what I kind of just said, there is bringing up the topic of the other plot line, but the tensions between the crew are kind of forgotten briefly, is kind of more of what I was implying. And they find out that his body was killed and then moved there, and they're trying to figure out a motive. Let's see. And they have a log that says that he had a turbo lift. He used the turbo lift at one point to get to one of the runabout pads. So they need to do some investigating on that. So O'Brien and Odo start focusing on that. Although they do have a slightly comedic line, because once O'Brien figures out he was on Runabout C, he's like, a runabout? What would he be doing out there at 4 in the morning? And Odo says, well, apparently getting murdered. Yep. All right, so while they're investigating this, let's see here. Odo's working, or O'Brien's working with Neela, and they have a bit of a heart to heart. They're talking about like what's going on about all this, and eventually, when they can't really figure it out, they sort of sit down, and he says, he asks if she had known Aquino at all because he barely knew him. Right? It's like, yeah, I met him on orientation day, but I haven't really had a conversation with him. He seemed like a nice guy. That's all I know. And when he asks if Neela knew anything about him, she's like, no, the Bajoran and Starfleet officers don't really socialize that much. And O'Brien's like, how come? He's like, I don't know. We just keep to ourselves. And she says, you know, O'Brien says, you're not like that with me. And she says, well, you're different. You don't put on any airs. You're just nicer. And, Aquino was an ensign. So technically he outranked O'Brien, right? So, I guess the Bajorans, if what she's saying is it seems to be maybe they're just not as friendly with the officers. O'Brien's more of a down to earth guy. We've seen that, both in a little bit of TNG, but mostly here in season 1 of DS9. He is a down to earth guy. He's very again, he doesn't put on those airs. He's very much a realistic guy. He hates Cardassians almost as much as Bajorans do. And so it seems like, again, the Bajorans have this sense that the Federation people think themselves not necessarily above, but different from them. Whereas O'Brien doesn't really do that. And of course, they get a little close, and then let's see, she ends up leaving, and O'Brien basically just says, "Be on your toes, O'Brien." Well, it's just one of those things where it's like they're having a nice emotional moment. And he's like, it's a callback to the first scene where Keiko was teasing him. He's like, oh, okay, you know what? Don't do anything stupid, O'Brien. Don't be an idiot. I don't know if that was just potential. I don't think it was one of them. I think it was actually all three were basically going to be given to him. Yeah, yeah, it's like a comet. Yeah. Um, in all fairness, it could just be the same graphic because let's be fair, the special effects back then were not great. We already have this. All right, all right. So let's see. They return to the prom. We return to the promenade, and we see Quark and Odo talking. Unfortunately, this isn't one of their best interactions. Although Quark is in good form. He sees all these religious folk entering, and he's like, "Oh, I better call more Dabo girls. Those religious folk love Dabo girls." Um, and let's see, Odo is basically trying to cut him off and trying to figure out, do you know anything about the murder of Ensign Aquino? And, Quark says, I don't deal in murder. It's like, no, but your friends do. He's like, yeah, that's true. But none of them have said anything about it. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then they make a point of Odo telling them, look, just keep your ears open, and we get another rule of acquisition, which makes sense for the Ferengi. Uh, and this is where O'Brien makes a point that he found a security bypass module, not on Pad C, but on Pad A. And while O'Brien's confused about it, Odo has figured it out. And he makes a point that all this makes perfect sense. Ensign Aquino goes to Runabout C because some sensor shows an anomaly in the security net there. He interrupts whoever is tampering with it and is killed. The killer puts his body in the conduit. Instead of going back up to Pad C, which might be traced to Aquino's turbolift log, They instead change their plans and move to Pad A. So really, someone just needs a turbo lift. Now, nothing's been stolen yet, but the point is someone's trying to make it so that they can steal a turbo lift they can steal a runabout when it's necessary. And then the scene ends with an explosion. Uh, there's an explosion. They run to it and they find the school's on fire. O'Brien tries to run in there because he thinks Keiko might be in there, and Odo has to hold him back. Very good. It turns out Keiko was not in there, and she, finds O'Brien in the crowd. So they put the fires out. Let's see here. Yeah, the school has been bombed. So let's see here. They go into the. But O'Brien's right there. Oh God. All right, let's see. Next, we're going to be talking about our feelings on the Middle East. All right. Well then, so they're in the school, and it turns out it's really just a homemade bomb that did that. Which, some questions about that, but we'll get to that because it's actually relevant in this episode, although it's mentioned before. There are weapon scanners on the promenade, like things that are scanning for weapons and detecting if anyone has any unregistered weapons they're not allowed to have. I mean, if it was easy enough to be a quote unquote homemade bomb, I feel like they should have some sort of scanner for that. Like, I can imagine you can make like a specialized bomb that gets past the scanners, but no, I get that. I guess I just mean like, I don't know. I mean, it just feels like in that case, it's very difficult to keep this place safe in that way. But if that again, I'm not saying it's against like the rules of the setting. I don't think it's a problem with the episode. I just feel like there should have been maybe some way to prevent this, but it doesn't. I guess there just isn't. So they hear a hubbub coming up from outside the school, and Kai Wynn is there. Oh my gosh, why would she? And yeah, immediately tensions are very high. Kai Wynn is playing the very nice old lady. He's like, "Oh, is anyone hurt? Is everyone okay?" And Cisco's already in his state of like, "Yeah, no, I'm not doing this." And she's like, "Oh, then the prophets have been kind today." And he's just like, "The prophets had nothing to do with what happened here. This was the work of a disturbed and violent mind who listened to your voice, not the prophets." And she says, "Is the emissary holding me responsible for this act of terrorism?" And he says, "The commander of this station is." Uh, let's see. "May the prophets forgive you for abandoning them." Again, Kai Wynn just absolutely ignoring him, saying, "No, no, 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 no. I will forgive you. The prophets will forgive you." It's like, oh, fuck off. Cisco then says, "You claim the prophets as your personal constituency, Vedic Wynn. I'm not convinced that's justified. Who do you speak for? An order that has barely listened to your assembly, so you come here looking for a more receptive audience." Now he's basically saying, "I understand you. I get your motivation. You came here to cause trouble." And she's like, "Oh, did Vedic Barile tell you this? He's as misguided as you are." "No, that's not fair. You're not simply misguided as I once thought." See, now I see that you wish nothing more, nothing less than to destroy us. She says, "You live without a soul, Commander. You and your Federation exist in a universe of darkness, and you would drag us there with you." And Cisco says, "Ah, you've just made your first mistake." And they're doing this in front of the whole crowd, I want to point out. Uh, so Cisco then sort of stands up. He gets a little bit higher. I guess he steps on some stairs, and he says, "The Bajorans who have lived here lived with us on this station, who have worked with us for months, who helped us move this station to protect the wormhole, who joined us to explore the Gamma Quadrant, who have begun to build a future of Bejor with us. These people know that we are neither the enemy nor the devil. We don't always agree. We have some damn good fights, in fact, but we always come away with them with a little bit better understanding and appreciation of the other. You won't succeed here. The school will reopen, and when your rhetoric gets old, the Bajoran parents will bring their children back." This is a pretty good speech he gives. Probably the first big one he gives in the series. Vedic Gwyn basically just says "we'll see" and leaves, but really, it highlights that her mistake is she's basically pushing too hard. You know, he accuses her of being responsible for bombing the school, even if she didn't do it personally. But there's basically a statement of like, you accuse me of being the devil when we've done nothing wrong yet. It's very clear what your motivation is. Like, you're trying to convince people, and you have nothing to show for it. So you're giving the most inflamed statement you can in hopes that it hears some people's ears, but it's only going to deafen them to your issues. Not gonna lie, it's a pretty snappy comeback. And of course, this scene ends with an interesting reveal where, as everyone's sort of walking away, Win and Neela look at each other, and Neela is definitely looking a little guilty. Yeah, this is probably where we can kind of reveal. This is why she was brought in for previous episodes. Basically, is she's in league with Kai Wen. Let's see, and then we have we have a scene in Ops next. So let's see. Cisco's basically asking about Keiko. He says she's a little shaken up, but they're basically going to be holding classes in a cargo bay. And Cisco says, "I'll make sure Jake's there." While this is going on, Neela basically quietly goes over to a console where she's sort of standing there while O'Brien and Dax are having a conversation. Let's see here. She's basically hearing that O'Brien has taken countermeasures to make sure that a runabout won't be taken. So whatever that Neela did, because it's revealed that Neela is the person who killed the ensign and who basically snuck on the pads. We know that, the characters don't know that, but now Neela knows that her plan had failed. So we'll get another scene with her in a second, but then Cisco basically gets a call from Bareil. He says that he decided to accept the invitation, and really it seems that the explosion at the school has forced Bareil's hand. Before he didn't want to help because it would hurt him politically. Now, I think this is nice. It's kind of showing his true colors in a good way. It's showing that, look, this has now become more than just a political issue. People are going to get hurt. I don't have... Go on. No, yeah, Cisco invited him when he first went there, yeah. Oh, look, all I'm saying is before he was saying, I can't be shown supporting you because as a political issue, it would really hurt my chances of becoming Kai. Now that the situation is more dire, a school has been blown up. I believe Bareil is showing that, no, you know what? I don't care if it's a political issue. I don't care if I lose faith here. I'm going up there. He refers to Cisco as a friend. He basically says, I don't care what the political ramifications are. Like, this is clearly an issue that needs to be dealt with. If I can help, I'm helping. Right? Before it was just an issue of differing philosophies. Now it's people might die. And Bareil doesn't have any sort of desire not to help. He wants to help. So again, it's a good show of his character. Let's see. Kind of going fast here. We then get a scene with Neela and Win in the in the temple. Wynn doesn't want to be seen with Neela. Clearly, they're in cahoots together, and being seen together, incriminates Wynn. Neela makes the point that they found out about the runabout, and now I don't have a means of escape. And Wynn says that we must accept that as the will of the prophets. And Neela says, like, look, but if I'm caught, I'll be executed. And Wynn says, the sacrifices the prophets call on us to make are great sometimes, my dear, but the rewards they'll give us will last through eternity. Some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make. But yeah, so fully revealed that while it might not have been one of them who set the bomb, Neela's next objective is going to probably have her have to do something drastic, and now she doesn't have a means of escape anymore. So things are really speeding up. I think this is pretty good pacing for an episode because it starts off slow, but then we get going. So O'Brien starts figuring something out. He's going to the computer. He's asking it like certain questions, and he realizes that someone has accessed. There's a specific subprogram labeled ANA, and it has security access code that is registered to him, but he's never made it, and also he doesn't have the ability to override it. So someone used his security pass to create a subprogram file on the main computer. Let's see. So basically, they just make a point that Dax asks him how you're going to get it. He's like, I'm going to run an adaptive program, or Dax is basically asked to run an adaptive program to break down the encryption, and they're basically constantly trying to figure out what's going on here. Let's see. Oh, Barile arrives on the station with Kira. They appear in front of a large crowd. Barile picks up a small boy. The crowd cheers, and the security people are basically just allowing them through. It's basically this huge parade of Barile. Kira's leading him. We return immediately back to O'Brien and Dax. They basically have calculated, okay, someone was trying to take one of these runabouts as an escape route, but an escape from what? Let's see. I'm trying to figure out like a specific line. They basically figured out that the program was meant to, hold on, let's see. They found an anomalous reading. A subspace relay was activated in security office 9 minutes and 7 seconds ago. Activated to do what? They don't know, or the computer doesn't know. And O'Brien basically starts running there as he starts getting kind of an idea of what's going on. On the promenade, we see that the crowd is sort of growing. Barile and Wynn meet. They're like, oh, Wynn. Wynn says, oh, I expected you sooner. And Barile says, it seems our paths have grown apart. Perhaps we can bring them together again. And Wynn says, I would like nothing more than that. So he's like, let's go to the school. We'll show our commitment to a peaceful resolution to all of this. Let's see. Yeah. So Dax basically finishes decoding the program, and O'Brien figures out that it was Neela who did it. Like, she's the one who basically created the program. She's the one who basically, because what the program does is it stops the weapon tracking from the promenade. So anyone could be carrying a weapon and they would have no way of tracking it. I guess presumably it tracks some sort of material that most of them use, right? It'd be like having some sort of like radar that detects gunpowder, right? Whatever unique thing that phasers use can be tracked. Yep. And at that exact moment, we see Neela in the crowd. Let's see here. She is holding a phaser or some sort of disruptor. Let's see. Yeah, the weapon detectors on the promenade have been shut down. They all appear to be functional, and O'Brien figures, like, that's got to be it. She's real. She's real good. She can make it look like they're normal. It's got to be the weapon detectors. Let's see. Yeah, so basically, they know that one of the weapon detectors is off, but they don't know where. And then O'Brien makes an educated guess. If you're gonna disable the weapon detectors anywhere, it's gonna be on the promenade. Especially now, like now that a big crowd's building there, he's realizing, oh shit, this is what's gonna happen. So then let's see. Yeah, then we cut to Neela. She's walking with purpose. Let's see. I'm trying to see. Oh yeah, O'Brien then contacts Cisco. He says like, look. He basically explains the situation to Cisco, and then Cisco's starting to like look around, figure out what's going on, because at this point it's too late to do anything else. Like you can't shut down this event. Everyone's here. But Cisco manages to spot Neela moving with purpose. Let's see. Baral makes a speech. We gather here to reject violence as a solution, to join hands with all people, and begin to trust again. Everyone applauds. And then it's I remember watching this recently, and it was real fucking funny. So, like, it slows down. Some dramatic music plays. Cisco jumps and goes, "No!" I want to see if I can get a picture of him in the air. Hold on, let's see if I can play it a little bit. he does a dramatic jump as people are screaming, bumping around. As Neela fires, she is bumped and she misses Vedic Ryle. Let's see. And as she's caught by Cisco, she says, "Look, the prophet spoke. I answered the call." Odo basically pulls her away to arrest her, and Kira's like, "It was all." Kira turns to Win, and she says, "It was all to get him here, wasn't it? The school, the protests, the bombing. You knew that would get him out of the monastery. You did it just to kill him, to stop him from becoming Kai." Because Kira basically notices that Win is not surprised by any of this. Like Win is not able to like appropriately react to this context because her plan fails right in front of her, right? So, like, oh man, my plan failed, and Kira notices, oh, your expression is not that of someone who should be surprised that you guys were shot at. You were in on this. Oh no, sure. That's what I mean. Like, it's suspicious that she's not reacting that way, and then you put all the pieces together in your head, and you're like, oh, you did this. So, yeah. Like after Kira says that, they basically have to walk away, and after interrogating Neela, she refused to give up who her co-conspirators were. She says there weren't any. And Kira and Cisco have a nice little moment. She says, we'll never be able to prove that Wynn was involved. And she says, Cisco asks if she's okay, and she says, "Okay, I've forgotten what it is like to be okay. I haven't seen okay in what seems like years. I was just sitting here thinking, last year at this time, I was fighting the Cardassians in some nameless swamp. If you stopped by and told me I was just 1 year later they'd be gone, I'd be wearing a uniform up here in charge of protecting some people." Like she's just flabbergasted. She's trying to figure out what happened to her life. And Cisco says, you're protecting like Cisco brings up, you're also protecting the Celestial Temple. And Kira's like, look, I envied Vedic Wynn because she was a true believer. I wanted my faith to be as strong as hers. And Cisco says, maybe it is. I got a report to put together for Starfleet. You ought to get some rest. And she says, I'd rather help you, Commander. I heard what you said to Vedic Wynn at the school. I just wanted you to know that you were right what you said about the Bajorans, at least about me. I don't think you're the devil. And Cisco says, maybe we've made some progress after all. And that's the end of season 1. So I like the explanation here with Kira explaining why she felt Wynn was, worthy of her trust, worthy of her sort of like appreciation. When you see someone with that much faith, you think, I wish I could have that much faith. Clearly, you're doing something that I'm not. But unfortunately, Vedic Wynn's faith was not exactly well placed. She was doing pretty damning things. And, it's a pretty, I don't want to say lackluster way to end the season. It's a very normal ending to an episode. I think it's not a bad ending at all. It's not super dramatic. It's not a cliffhanger, but it also is. It does leave a lot of areas open. We now have new characters involved. We have Wynn, we have Barile, we have some new political tension building within the Bajoran faith. So, all in all, I think it's a pretty good end to the episode. Decent end to the season. Anything else you kind of want to say about this episode? I mean, we've been talking for a while about it, so we did a pretty good job, I think, of breaking everything down. It got pretty fast there at the end, though. No, we're still going. Well, I don't think we're done. I mean, I have some things I might want to mention. Like, I think it's interesting. No, go on. All right, all right. I was just saying, I think it's interesting that Kira points out the fact that she felt Wynn's faith was also like super. It was so convincing that she wanted to be like her. That's probably the same thing that convinced Neela. It's sort of like it's nice to reinforce that like while we didn't get a lot of time with Neela, we can kind of understand how she felt that way because we understand Kira. And Kira, I'm not saying Kira would have gotten to the same position, right? But it's the idea of like I can understand how someone could fall for that. Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't even say that. I don't know if everything, especially with everything Kira's been through, I don't think she could fall like that. What I simply mean is, if someone like Kira, who is much more level-headed, especially by the end of the season, if she was sort of drawn into a Vedic Wind's spell, I could understand how someone like Neela was, who was, you know, admittedly an insignificant character, but also she's nowhere near the rank Kira is, so presumably there's some reason for that. And I know there was like one more thing I kind of wanted to say. Um, what was I gonna say? It was about oh yeah, it's weird to think that apparently last year at this time Kira was fighting Cardassians. Like 7 months since the start of DS9, right? Presumably there would have been a few months just getting the Federation in there to start working, like getting all that paperwork and getting all that stuff settled. So yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I just mean like 5 months essentially to go from like fighting Cardassians to already like peace negotiations have somehow been like gone through, and now also like the Federation deals with Bejor have gone through. It seems a little fast, but I'm not saying it's a problem. It seems a little fast. I can imagine it probably was expedited, or maybe it was like in the midst, but there was still conflict going on technically. Like until the ink's dry on the peace treaties, people are still killing each other. Yeah, but all in all, I mean, I think we'll have a lot more to say about the season when we do our little recording where we're also rating the episodes. So we'll probably save some of that for then. Um, all in all, good episode. I'm probably give it a B. There's a few really good parts there, and I might reevaluate it. But ultimately, I think like actually, you know what? Did we? I don't think we really came up with any problems. I think I'm going for an A. Yeah, but I mean, you did make. I think you made a good point. Like, if it's a homemade bomb, it'd be very hard to track that. I mean, look at real life, right? Like, we can regulate certain things as much as possible. People are going to get around that, right? So the same is true in the future. So you know, well, it's also just like you know, people will figure out how to make weapons, explosives, and all those sorts of things. Regardless, yeah, yeah, and yeah. Well, it's just people are going to figure out how to do that. So I can imagine maybe they had some sort of briefcase that you could hide a bomb in, right? Like it's like it can block what few sensors are trying to track those things. You know, uh, detecting things like phasers makes a lot more sense. I think it's a little bit of a contrivance, but there's no reason why it can't be that way. It's just it feels like it should be different, but I can understand why it is this way. So honestly, I'm going to give the episode an A. I don't think there's any major issues. and I think overall there's a lot of good scenes. A lot of it's kind of standard, like it's mostly just plot, not too much character, but there's not a sacrifice of character. So I feel we get just enough character, good enough plot. All in all, pretty great episode. I'm giving it an A, not a high A, but an A. It's no duet. Oh yeah, I mean, I just like I agree duet's the best, but I like Forsaken more. I think. Um, but either way, all right. That is episode 20 of DS9. We have finished the first season, and we'll sort of do our wrap up next time. Thank you everyone for tuning in this season. Pike, any last words? And you know what? I'm done with the cutting off thing. I'm not gonna do it anymore. I swear to God. No, look, I'm not even cutting you off here. In fact, I'm going to cut us off in three, two,